We have to start now, Mr. Speaker. Instead of standing in our places and debating a bill 117 on electoral reform in the province of Nova Scotia. Members of public, Mr. Speaker, I just find that there's too many important issues that face us today as Nova Scotians and many Canadians that we're not dealing with. We're dealing with all kinds of issues, Mr. Speaker, that have nothing to do with making lives better for the people that we represent in this legislature, Mr. Speaker. Climate change issues. When you have people that are catching grasshoppers in January, when you have bears that are not hibernating in our own province, when you have the tides rising all across this province, there's something wrong, Mr. Speaker, and yet we stand in our place today to debate Bill 117, Mr. Speaker. A bill for election reform in the province of Nova Scotia. I agree. No more corporations donations. No more union donations. Absolutely, 100%. The federal government has done that. The federal government has given so much percent per vote, which is understandable. But, Mr. Speaker, who's going to benefit by this bill? There's only two parties that are going to benefit by this bill. And one of them is not the party that I stand in my place and represent in this legislature, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and the people of Nova Scotia should know that the government party gets the most $5,000 donations in this province. So that will benefit them the most. And realize that the Liberal Party, the third party in the province, have over $3 million in the trust fund that they're going to benefit. Now, I played a lot of sports in my days growing up, Mr. Speaker. When I started the game, in a game of baseball, the score was always 0-0. When I played hockey, the score was 0-0 to start with. When I played football, the games are always started. The score was 0-0. Why do we not all want to start on a level playing field? Why do we want to just say, okay, get rid of all donations altogether like the federal government did? Start on a level playing field. And why give the other party $3.4 million to start with, to do what they want to do? And they'll swear in and state that, we are going to do nothing in the elections with that trust fund. Where did that money come from? They don't, Mr. Speaker, as far as I'm concerned, they don't have the right to do anything with that trust fund. But give it away, donate it to some less fortunate people in the province of Nova Scotia, do something with it, donate it to their grandchildren. But this government should not enable them to use that trust fund for political gains in the province of Nova Scotia. It's wrong, and I'll stand in my place today and tell you it's wrong, Mr. Speaker. We have an opportunity in Nova Scotia to become world leaders in development, green energy, renewable energy, wind energy, so many opportunities to change our way of living, of influence how many people consume energy, of playing a leadership role in easing the anxiety of climate change crisis and the cleaning up of our own backyard. But we are talking about the answers today, Mr. Speaker. No, we're talking about those answers and problems today. No, we're not. We're talking about Bill 117. That's the bill we're talking about today. Are we in here debating what is the best thing for the province of Nova Scotia, greenhouse gases? Are we talking about climate change? Are we talking about emissions, pollutions? No, we're talking about Bill 117. Mr. Speaker, I see that I'm getting some response from some of the members in government over there, so maybe I'll focus my comments now on, I'll focus some of my comments, Bill 117 right now, to the people of Cape Breton. Overwhelmingly rejected strip mining in our community because we are a community of great people, smarter than some people think we are, Mr. Speaker. We know that strip mining will do to our environment, strip mining will do to our environment. We know how many generations it will take for the earth to heal. We know that donations to a leadership campaign, Mr. Speaker, and that's another thing in this. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see faint little relevance to strip mining to the issue of the bill, the title of the bill before the committee. I would make an objection on the basis that the member seems to be straying rather far from the title of the bill. I'd like you to rule on that.
Thank you. I'll ask the honourable member to return back to the principle of the bill, please.
Thank you. The bill, and getting to my point on this bill, I think in this bill in section, let me have a look here, section, and this is where I was going with this point, Mr. Speaker. Chapter 4, let's see, 14A, okay. I think in this bill, when I was looking towards the leadership contributions in this bill, Mr. Speaker, Section 8 of Chapter 4 is amended. And what it says in this bill is does not include a candidate for leadership of political party. And this is where I was going with the strip mining, Mr. Speaker. If you were to look at the last leadership campaign of that party, and you'll see who got the permits for strip mining in Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker. Now you can understand the connection, Mr. Speaker. Now you can understand where I was going with that, Mr. Speaker, that connection to that company gave $7,500 to the leadership of that government leader over there and received a permit for strip mining. Now maybe the member can understand where I'm drawing my lines this morning here, Mr. Speaker. You know, when you donate, it's perception. Whether it's right or wrong, it's all about perception. When you donate to the leadership of any party, I don't care if it's the NDP, the Liberal, the Tories, when you donate money to the leadership of any party, you know, when government robs Peter to pay Paul, government is going to look after Paul, Mr. Chair. Government is going to look after Paul, and that's what this is all about. Is that about Bill 117? I'm pretty sure that it says leadership in this bill when I looked at it, and that's why I'm focused on that aspect of it. If you donate money to leadership campaigns and leadership in the province, Mr. Speaker, you understand it's perception. It's perception, what people think, and cynicism of what people think. If I donate to that member, or I donate to the member of that party, my party, or any party, and I'm giving a reward by donating to the leadership, Mr. Speaker, that's what people, the cynicism in the people of the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. It's the future of this province, Mr. Speaker, with this bill. This bill is doing one thing and one thing only, kicking the legs out from underneath the NDP, Mr. Speaker. Bill 117, Mr. Speaker. It benefits the government. It benefits the third party. It benefits nobody else in this province. It doesn't benefit the young people. It doesn't benefit the seniors. It doesn't benefit people in many groups and many organizations. It doesn't benefit the poor. This bill only benefits two things, and that's why I stand in my place today, Mr. Speaker. When I could be debating, I'm making a point of debating this issue about Bill 117 and election reform in the province of Nova Scotia. That's what's so wrong about this bill, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I have so many young families in my riding and young families across the province that are struggling with so many struggles that they need us to address, that they need us to spend this vital, important time in this legislature addressing many of those issues I just touched on. They can't find jobs. You know, they have to leave to go to Alberta. So many of the young families are crippled with student debts from skyrocketing tuition, that they cannot make ends meet. It's hard to believe that a young couple in my riding, 2 teachers and 2 professionals, go shopping at the dollar store for their children's toys and go to rent-to-own to furnish their apartment, Mr. Speaker. These are families that are middle class, that will fuel the engines of our economy and the next generation, to pay for all of us when we are retired and need the care the most. And this generation is so crippled with student loan debt, you know, when they graduate from university with a mortgage before they even buy a house. They don't spend the disposable income in our small business. The small business depend on this income for survival. You know, and Mr. Speaker, again, I talk about Bill 117 and about the issues that are facing Nova Scotians today. You know, disposable income. Mr. Speaker, I guess I'll try to go between the age of say 0 to 35 and say 65 and above, Mr. Speaker, to say that these are the age groups that are suffering the most in this province at this present time. When they graduate from, I spoke to a friend of mine who was home from Vancouver over the holidays and said when he went to St. Mary's University back in the 70s and graduated with a $4,000 student loan debt. We have young people graduating from college and university today owing $40,000 and $50,000, if not higher. Again, I bring back to having a mortgage on a home but not owning a home. You can't afford it and have no disposable income, Mr. Chair. They have no disposable income to spend. Are these the issues that I'm standing in my place debating today? No, I'm debating Bill 117, Mr. Chair. Debating Bill 117. Am I standing in my place today telling this young couple, you know what I mean, that, you know, take a drive through any of these smaller communities. For example, the member from Glace Bay, if you drove through his community in Glace Bay, Mr. Speaker, the member of the third party, at the Sterling Mall in Glace Bay, at one time, there used to be a Sobeys, a department store, a record store. What's there now? A payday loan outfit, a dollar store, a rent-to-own, Mr. Speaker. Like the environment crisis, these are signs of serious economic crisis in our communities. And where is the leadership of this province? We are sitting down here today talking about Bill 117. We are in this House in January. I wish I was a historian and I would know when was the last time this House sat in January, and I think somebody had mentioned it to me that it was when Mr. John Savage was the Premier of the province of Nova Scotia, was the last time that this legislature sat in January. To sit in January to debate Bill 117, what a shame. With so many issues out there facing so many people in the province of Nova Scotia, we find ourselves in the middle of this month, at 8 degrees, by the way, outside, gorgeous. You know, are we here to talk about seniors? No, we're here to talk about Bill 117. You know, seniors, affordable housing for seniors, Mr. Speaker. There's such a waiting list all across this province for affordable housing for seniors. The seniors, the generations that built this province, and now they're suffering the most, Mr. Speaker. Co-pay, you know. When I saw a program on CBC Radio, which I actually attended and went to and sat in on a forum on poverty in Cape Breton, and one of the stats that I heard was the most astonishing, and it just took me back in my chair when I heard it. 83% of the seniors in Cape Breton live in poverty. 83%. Where is the leadership in the legislature from all of us to help these seniors? Is this leadership standing up in my place today debating Bill 117? Why couldn't I be standing up in my place today saying I'm debating and looking for issues and trying to get the ear of a cabinet minister or the ear of anybody in government to listen to? We have to realize that 83% of the seniors in Cape Breton live in poverty. Is that what this society and that as we as legislature has come to? 83%, Mr. Speaker, of the seniors in the province of Nova Scotia. I find it appalling that, co-pay, housing, I find it appalling that we're not sitting in our places here as legislatures and debating those important issues to the people of Nova Scotia. Those issues, making lives better for seniors, Mr. Speaker, seniors and young people. I wish I was standing in my place today instead of debating Bill 117, Mr. Speaker, and debating youth issues in the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, debating those issues, you know what I mean? Mr. Speaker, young people are assets that we have to protect, Mr. Speaker, and they're not liabilities that we should have to be able to manage. They're our assets. If they're our future, they're our assets in this province of Nova Scotia. They are not our liabilities. Bill 117 is a bill, Mr. Speaker, that I can't bring myself around to stand in my place today with so many important issues in this province to think that I'm standing in my place debating this, Mr. Speaker. Now, are we investing more money in prevention, with our kids, their families, to help them be better citizens, more productive citizens? It's easier to spend dollars on prevention than it is to spend dollars on management, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, why are we not putting more money into supports for young people? Why are we not putting more money into constructive programming for young people, Mr. Speaker? Why? Why are we not doing that? Why are we not doing these issues for seniors and young people? Seniors in the province of Nova Scotia. I had a senior stop by in the last month or so in my office asking me, Mr. Speaker, about the home energy program, the EnerGuide program. And he said he had read the EnerGuide program, and I have a copy of it here that he had dropped off at my office, Mr. Speaker. And he said to me, I applied for the EnerGuide program to make my home more efficient. I'm a senior. I'm only 61 years of age. I said, yes. He said, well, Gordy, here's the problem. I'm not eligible for the Nova Scotia Senior Home Energy Assistance Program of the $400 grant because I'm not 65. I'm only 61. So instead of me standing in my place debating with the Minister of Energy or talking to the Minister of Energy, telling them that, Mr. Speaker, that I should be standing in my place debating Bill 117, and I see I have the ear of some government members. Yeah, all those. All those years at Sydney Steel do take their toll on people, I have to say, Mr. Committee Chair. Mr. Speaker, I keep saying Mr. Speaker, and I know it's Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry for that, Mr., and I apologize. And I know before we broke for the Christmas break and the holidays, and we finished up in November, there was a lot of issues in this House around decorum and what people were saying and what people were hollering back and forth, Mr. Speaker. And I kind of said to myself that I would not do that as an elected official, that I would not stand up and belittle or make jest of somebody or call somebody down. It's not my way, and it's not, you know. I remember this Bill 117, we talk about electoral reform, and when I went to get into politics, and my family was like, geez, why would you want to get into that? All the sports you play, that's the dirtiest game you could ever get into. And I didn't realize that till I started looking at this Bill 117. And it's just all about, you know, it's all about kicking my party when we're down. That's all it's about. It's not about election reform in the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I guess a community is only as great as its aspirations. And therefore, this House, this gathering of representatives, sent to this historic House to be the voices of the province, to be the aspirations of each community, large, small, each seat in this House of Assembly can only be our great aspirations and intentions to deliver the best possible legislation that we can to the people that we represent, Mr. Speaker. This bill, Bill 117, is a sad extension of the truth, isn't it? It validates cynicism. It says that this House has become what so many critics believe we already are. That's what it has become. But we can be better than this. The history of this House asks to be greater than this. It asks that us remember Joseph Howe's dream of a true, responsible government. It asks to be better. It asks us, as legislators, to be better than this. What I mean by that is, Mr. Chair, is that we have more important things to do in the province of Nova Scotia than be standing in our places debating election reform Bill 117. Who does this benefit? It benefits the government, and it benefits the third party. That's who it benefits. It doesn't benefit this party in whatsoever. So this is far, you know, or this province. What does it benefit in this province? It doesn't. It doesn't. To those across the aisle and beside us, today, this evening, ask yourself if this is political opportunistic aspirations is what we want to become as legislators. Is this what you've asked your citizens to become? Is this what you want your citizens, the families of your constituents, who strive day in and day out to survive, is this what you want their voice to sound like in the legislature of Nova Scotia? When you knock on their doors in the next election, would you look them in the face? Would you look their children in the face and say that your job is to win at all costs, to cripple democracy so you can sit here? Is that what we are here for? And I'll repeat that. Is that what we are here for? Are we here to cripple democracy? You know, or are we here for greater aspirations, Mr. Chair? Are aspirations for their families sometimes greater than winning at all costs? I'll ask that again. Are your aspirations for their families sometimes greater than winning at all costs? And will you look at yourselves and still let the business of this House, the business of Joseph Howe, responsible government, be something more than just winning? Is it all about just winning? Is that why we're in the legislature in January, about just winning? Is that what Bill 117 is about, just winning? It's a win-win situation for the government. It's a win-win situation for the Liberal Party, the third party. Is that what this is all about? Is that what we got elected to? Is that what the aspirations of this House is? Mr. Speaker, in the last election, the people of Cape Breton Nova elected a handful of Cape Breton Tory MLAs for a very specific reason. They look around at their beautiful island, their pristine piece of country, and they say, we're not part of the corporate greed that devastates the natural resources we hold so dear, that generations have kept pure. We do not want it to be torn apart and stripped mined. And I think I heard them saying that they will stand in front of bulldozers if they have to. So, we'll elect somebody from the Tory caucus, someone who will be a representative of the people's aspirations for clean water, clean fields, and clean streams. Someone who will fight for us in the caucus every day to conceive these irresponsible idea of strip mining in Cape Breton. Irresponsible strip mining in Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker. So we sent politicians of all stripes, Mr. Chair, to this legislature to do the best you can for the people that you represent in Cape Breton and elsewhere in the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, with those two candidates that were elected recently for the government party from Cape Breton, they said they were both against strip mining in Cape Breton Island. And anybody that's ever been there, and I know all members of the House have been, they'll understand why these members were saying this. They understand the pristine beauty, the nature of this island, Mr. Speaker. If I was standing in my place today debating strip mining in Cape Breton, I'd be fine. I'm standing in my place today debating Bill number 117, Mr. Speaker. Is this the business of, is this what our aspirations are? Not to deal with so many important issues that are out there today? Is this what we are all about today in the legislature? Win at all costs? Is this what this is about? Winning at all costs. Providing the government with more finances for elections, leaving the third party with their trust fund. In other words, all I can see from this is winning at all costs. I was not elected to be with that attitude of winning at all costs. I was elected to do the job to make sure that the health and safety and the concerns of the residents that I represent in this legislature. But the attitude in the last 2 months in this legislature is winning at all costs. That's what it's all about. It's not about leadership, it's about winning. It's not about people, it's all about winning. It's all about winning. It's not about leadership and it's not about good government and responsible government. It's about winning. And that's all it's about is winning. When the next election is called and we go door to door to see our citizens, what will these MLAs, myself included, say? I can imagine what we'll hear on the door on these people's homes. I hope in my heart that they do what I hope they don't hear. Some of the debate that's going on in this legislature about this bill. Well, exactly what they expect from from politicians. You promise me something, to get the job, and when you get the job, you never deliver. That's the cynicism that we face as electors in the province of Nova Scotia each and every day, during elections, when we're out in the street, and that's what it's all about. This bill is all about winning, and the people, the cynicism and the critics in the province of Nova Scotia are going to be so glad to hear that, this is what this is all about. It's about winning. It's not providing good government, doing the right thing for your constituents, and the first thing they're going to tell you on the doorsteps in the next election is going to be, you promised me something to get the job and you never delivered. And that's what they're going to tell us all when we knock on those doors in the next election. That's what makes this business, Bill 117, so upsetting to me. And what I don't understand is why these members across the aisle and the members over on the other side, the third party, why they don't get it. Or worse, why they don't care. Mr. Speaker, again, I stand in my place today saying Bill 117 is not a very good bill for the province of Nova Scotia. They just don't care. I spent a lot of my time working with young people before I ever got elected to the House of Assembly, Mr. Speaker, telling them that service to the people, service to others is noble and required of us all. Why they should run for office, municipally, provincially, federally. That we are not opportunistic cronies, hell-bent on winning. And that's all this is about, is winning. We're not opportunistic people in this legislature, but this bill is all about winning, nothing else. And don't let anybody else fool you. It's all about winning. It's all about putting coppers and the dollars in the government's pockets and leaving the third party with the dollars they have already had. And I've heard words before Christmas about alleged, all the things that I've heard and all the negative, commentary I've heard about that trust fund and looked into that trust fund. But when I have a Liberal tell me that, that money was there from, that was John A. Macdonald's life insurance policy. That's where that came from. And he honestly believed that. He believed that that's where that came from. He honestly believed that. And I said, really, you believe that? Yeah, that's where that came from. That money is not dirty money, Gordy. That money, John A. MacDonald left that to us, and we kept that all those years. Oh, okay. I believe you. I really do. I said, I do believe you. I thought it was really good.
It's the culture
You know,
of entitlement.
it's entitlement, you know, like, I just wonder, Mr. Speaker, at that aspect of it. Is it all about the cost of winning? We will do anything to get to this legislature at anything at all. We'll say anything or do anything. That's the cynicism that people believe out there today, that we will do anything to get in this legislature. But when we get here, we do nothing for the health and safety of the people that we represent. We do nothing. Is that what it's all about, winning at any cost? Is that why we're elected, to win at any cost? That's all this bill is about. It's just to boot the legs out from underneath us to provide two other parties with finances. That's all it's about. Don't let anybody else ever tell you any different. And I surely, well, you know, I kind of believed that fellow when he told me that insurance policy was John A. MacDonald's. But I mean, I kind of debated that myself to say, well, you know, maybe that's where it came from. Mr.
Order, please. The Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and not sure where to start in points of order. Repetition, not even coming close to speaking on the title of the bill, wandering off in areas unknown other than to the member himself. I'm just curious if we might actually ask the member to actually speak on the bill here, and you know, I think he made reference to, I'm not sure if he's saying Johnny MacDonald or a John A., but I think I've at least had a dozen times, and this doing nothing about at least 15 times. So I'm just wondering if the chair might assist the House as to whether that's the appropriate debate to take place at this stage.
Thank you. I would ask the honourable member to return back to the principle of the bill that's before the committee, please.
That's the second time today, Mr. Chair. I guess I must be making a point with somebody, I guess. Somebody's listening anyway. You know, well, that's good. You know. Make some points, yeah. Make some points about the decorum before that member in this legislature before Christmas. That's a good point. I won't get into that, Mr. Chair. Let's talk about Bill 117, yeah. Oh, here we go again.
Order, please.
Tell him to stand up in his place.
The Leader of the Liberal Party.
Sit down.
On a point of order.
Mr. Chair, first of all, if the member has any allegations about decorum that he wishes to make, I would certainly appreciate that. I think him making those kind of allegations without following them up. What I would remind the member that it was actually his colleagues from Halifax Citadel and Halifax Fairview that were found to have breached the rights and privileges of the members of this House, and were asked to apologize and retract that. Maybe that's the actual decorum that he was referring to before Christmas.
The honourable, that certainly is not a point of order. The honourable member from Cape Breton Nova has the floor, and I would ask the honourable member to please return to speak on the principle of the bill that's before the committee. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd love to speak on that bill, and now, is somebody going to stand up again, or can I continue? You know, I mean, that's 3 times.
The honourable member has the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, thank you. Bill 117, Mr. Speaker. We all know what kind of issue this has been about the trust fund. I've tried to keep it as clean as I possibly can as I stand in my place today. But I'll tell you, Mr. Chair, you know, I guess the former member of Cape Breton Nova, who was a member of that party, might have been removed from this position a few times. But I'm not going to head in that direction today, Mr. Chair. I'm going to try to keep it civil as I possibly can for the new year. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Political record, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Focus, keep it going. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member from Cape Breton Nova has the floor.
What were you saying there, Trent? Mr. Speaker, let's go back to Bill 117. How about we focus on maybe voter turnout? Yeah, what about that? It's gone down. You know, has voter turnout gone up any in the province of Nova Scotia? Voter turnout's gone down. It's an all-time low. In the history of the province of Nova Scotia, voter turnout is at an all-time low. Why is that? Is this Bill 117 going to correct that? Well, maybe this will be a good way for voters to punish punish legislatures by just not showing up. So that $1.50 per vote, the more people don't show up, it's a great way to punish a government. It's a great way to punish people that are elected officials. Isn't that a great way to punish them? Just don't go to the polls. At a time when this government is introducing Bill 117, a bill that is focused on election reform. This bill is just focused on kicking the feet out from underneath the NDP. That's what it's all about. It's all about winning at all costs. There's no other thing. It's all about winning at all costs. There's no other. Don't let anybody else ever tell you that this Bill 117 is about anything else but about winning at all costs. That's what it's about. That's all it's about. It's not about election reform. When we have people not showing up to vote, you know, we have people not showing up to vote. We have young people that are so cynical about the process that they're not showing up to vote. When you have young people that are working so hard to pay off $40,000 to $50,000 student loan debts that they have occurred, you know, what do? Do they go to food banks? Do they go to community services? What do they do? That's the kind of legislation that we should be putting in place, not this legislation known as winning at all costs. That's what it's all about. We could all win. This bill here does nothing for this party. It does everything for the government and does everything for the third party. Does nothing for this. I don't understand how you can stand in the place in this legislature and let the third party keep that trust fund and stand in this legislature. I don't understand how it could happen. You know, I'm hoping that the leadership candidates for the new party, after their leadership convention, that the new leader for that party will stand up in his place and stand up and say, I will get rid of the trust fund. Or her, yes. Well, possibly, yes, that's what I'm hearing. It could be a her. That's the rumor, and it could be a her.
So she should speak up today.
So maybe she should speak up today. Maybe those that are running, or future members that are going to run for leadership, should stand in their place and stand up and debate Bill 117. You know, answer it now or answer it later. I mean, is this election reform in the province of Nova Scotia? No. This is about winning at all costs. That's all it's about. Nothing else. You know, I would go back and say it's a deal between two Cape Breton boys, but I won't go to there. I just won't go to there. You know, I've been there. No, here we go.
Order, please. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think the member was trying to suggest that there's backroom deals being made or anything like that between any members, Mr. Speaker, and I think that's unfair to all members in this House. And but I would ask the member to give clarification on that. I'm sure he didn't mean it in that respect.
Thank you. The honourable member from Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I do remember that member from Cape Breton Richmond standing up in his House saying that he did have a deal. Maybe I'm wrong, but he did say he had a deal. Am I wrong?
It was in the Herald too, yeah.
It was in the Halifax Herald. Did he stand up and say that he had a deal? I'm not accusing anybody of any backroom deals, but that member stood up in this legislature and said he had a deal. That's the truth. That's the truth. He had a deal. He said it. I'm only repeating it. You know, the worst part about this whole deal is about winning. You know, I don't understand about, is it politically opportunistic members of this House with this deal to win at all cost? That's what it's all about, to win at all cost. You know, again, I'll quote, like I quoted earlier, to John Kenneth Galbraith. There are times in politics when you must be on the right side and lose. It's more important for me to be right than do what's right for my constituents than simply to win. It's more important that we do the right things in this legislature instead of winning at all costs. It's more important that we deal with issues that are out there facing people in the constituencies all across this province. But winning at all costs, you know, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I mean, what is the rush? What was the rush to get this bill into law amendments? What was the rush to get this bill back into the legislature? What is the rush today? If we as legislatures were in such a hurry to pass good, positive legislation to help benefit the elderly, the young people, the working poor, that would be a rush. But to rush this Bill 117 through, I see no rush in this. I see no rush in this. How much public consultation was involved in this Bill 117? You know, we gave the people in the province of Nova Scotia 2 weeks before Christmas to come up and give us their opinion on Bill 117. There wasn't enough time. There's still enough time. It needs 6 months to get the input from the citizens of the province of Nova Scotia about this bill. You know, We should have had a proper committee set up to report back to us as legislators on what the purpose of this bill was. Was this a good bill for the province of Nova Scotia?
Tell us about the committee. Has it reported yet?
You know, I haven't heard any committee report yet. They're trying to rush this through, you know. I just think that they've just rushed this bill through as fast as they can to get it through with no consultation or no input from the residents of Nova Scotia. You know, you know, the electoral history of this province, you know, to rush this through, I just think it's wrong. I just think it sends a message out to anybody that we represent, is that it's winning at all cost. That's what it's all about. Is that what I'm elected for? To tell the people that I represent in this legislature that it's winning at all costs. That's what it's all about. You know. I wonder, you know, can we say that, you know, at the end of the day, and let me get this right, you know, the deal is already in, this bill is going through, you know. Sometimes in opposition, the only collateral you have is time. And that's all we have is time. It's the only collateral we have at this time, you know. I think it's right when this bill says that we need to ban corporate and union donations. I agree 100%. You know, the ban on corporate and union donations, you know, because that perception of, you know, giving to somebody and getting something in return will be gone. You know, I do agree with that. But the $5,000 as an individual donation, I think that should be gradually scaled back, maybe $5,000 1 year, $3,000 2 years' time, to $2,000 down to zero.
That's a good idea.
How many campaign
You know,
donations of $5,000
you know,
did you get?
yeah, I looked at my my campaign donations in when I ran 3 times in 99, 2000, 2006, and I didn't see any $5,000 donations to my campaign, individual ones. You know, I had a lot of small donations, you know, which are good donations. I had a $1,000 donation, which I thought was fantastic and great.
That's a lot of money
You
in
know,
Whitney Pier.
oh, I guess it's a lot of money from anywhere to receive a $1,000 donation. Actually, I had 2 of them, so I was quite shocked and quite pleased, I guess, in one sense. But I mean, I agree. Banning union donations and corporate donations, great move. It's the way to go. It's a great idea. But you know, follow their federal cousins in Ottawa. Follow their federal cousins in Ottawa. There's the example right there in front of them. That's good legislation. That's a good bill that they passed in Ottawa. You know, all parties supported it. Why did all parties support that bill in Ottawa? Because it was a good idea. This idea, Bill 117, is not a good idea. When you have the advantage given to 2 parties out of 3, this bill is not a good idea. Ottawa had the right idea, and that bill received
And 3 other provinces
unanimous,
as well.
unanimous, let I say unanimous, unanimous from everybody in that parliament supported that bill. Why are we standing here today debating this bill? Because there's only 2 things that, you know, that's in this bill here, and we already know about it. You know, do it the right way. Get rid of the $5,000 donations.
That's right.
Let's restore the public's trust in elected officials in the province of Nova Scotia. You know, why did we not use the election commission in the province of Nova Scotia? You know, why was that not an all-party election commission committee to deal with this bill? You know, not even consulted. No, you know, this bill is just being rammed through. It's being rushed through. And when bills get rushed through and rammed through, some bills are good, this bill is not. This bill benefits 2 out of the 3 parties in this legislature, and that's all it benefits. It benefits nothing else. But yet in Ottawa, they had unanimous consent from all the parties about their bill, which banned union donations, which banned corporate donations, you know, and said that, you know, ban donations altogether, have it at 0. Why do you think the government wants to leave the $5,000 donations in this bill? Because they're going to benefit the most. It's all about winning at all costs. It's not about doing the right thing for the people that elect you to this House of Assembly. It's about winning at all costs. You know, and I don't understand why the third party is supporting it.
Let's go back to the trust funds.
Maybe the third party, when the new leader gets elected in April, that he can stand in his place, he or she can stand in her place or his place and tell the members of this legislative assembly, you know, why they supported Bill 117. You know, why? Was it because of the trust fund? You know, was that it? Or was it because of the attitude and why people are so cynical about elected officials in the province of Nova Scotia? Why they don't trust us? Because they see us as this bill here, you know, is winning at all costs. That's all it is. It's not about electoral reform in the province of Nova Scotia. It's about winning at all costs. You know, the taxpayers are going to ultimately pay the bill for this bill. You know, were they properly consulted? It's going to come out of their income tax, and it's going to come out of their pockets to pay $1.50 per vote for this bill. Were any of the, how many people in the province of Nova Scotia were consulted about this bill? 2 weeks before Christmas, December 2006, this bill was rammed into this legislature. That's why, in the law amendments, that's why we're here today in January '07 to discuss this bill, and this bill has nothing to benefit anybody but the governing party and the third party. That's it. Nobody else. I fully agree with banning union donations, corporate donations, but what I disagree with is the $5,000. I mean, who's it going to benefit? That's too much. If the government wanted to put an amendment in this bill to gradually bring it down to zero over years, I could agree with that. Compromise. A minority government's about compromise. You know, this is not a minority government, this is a majority government. You know, people say this is a minority government in the province. This is a majority government.
It's a coalition government.
No, well, it's a majority government. I mean, when you kind of put through bills like this that benefits each other, it doesn't benefit anybody else in the province of Nova Scotia. They benefit those two parties. That's what this bill is all about. And I call this bill, Bill 117, winning at all costs. That's all it's about, is winning at all costs. Not doing the right thing for the people that you represent in this chamber, this historic chamber, Joseph Howe, responsible government for the people. This bill is winning at all costs. It's a shame. Have our aspirations as politicians gone to the point that it's about winning at all costs? Is that why I'm standing in my place today? You know, Bill 117, ban corporate donations and union donations. I agree with that. But let's get rid of the personal donations, $5,000. Let's bring it down on a scale. Let's bring it down to zero. Just take a photocopier, go to Ottawa and get a copy of their bill and bring it back here. You know, that's the simple thing to do with common sense, is they just get a copy of their bill and pass that. You know, that had unanimous support in the House of Commons. Why could we not bring in a bill like that? You know,
And that includes leadership
you know,
selection.
and I mean, and that also in their bill is collects leadership contributions, you know, to leadership campaigns. They're doing it right in Ottawa. We're doing it wrong in the province of Nova Scotia. Wrong because we've never consulted the public of Nova Scotia to help us to get input from the people that put us in our seats about this bill. It was rushed through the Christmas holidays where we could get no input or no kind of say from people, you know, about corporate donations, union donations, $5,000 individual donations. You know, I wonder, at times go by in life and say, when somebody asks me when my political career is over, and I'll say, you know, this is the worst piece of legislation that I've ever been associated with since I've been elected. This is the worst flawed piece of legislation that came through here, Bill 117. You know, get rid of union donations, get rid of corporate donations, fine. That's understandably Bill 117. But to sit and say that we're in here debating for a possibility of 40 hours in January, to debate what? Am I in here debating for more housing for seniors? Am I in here debating for more programs for young people in the province? Am I in here debating, asbestos issues? No. You know, what am I doing in here? I'm debating Bill 117.
Trust funds for the Liberal Party. That's what
I'm
you're
debating alleged, the word alleged, trust funds. I've heard all those before Christmas. I've heard all those sayings and I've heard all those things. But the whole thing here is that this bill, Bill 117, is the bill that I will always say is winning at all costs. That's what it's all about. Kicking the legs out from underneath the NDP, booting the legs out from underneath them when you have the chance. You know, what they're saying is that, well, they're not saying that, I mean, when you play sports and you start out in a game of football or a game of hockey or a game of baseball, the score is 0-0. Why could we not start out with this bill at 0-0? would only make sense that everybody would have an even playing field. That everybody would have an even playing field. This is not an even playing field. This is not. This is flawed legislation. This is not an even playing field. This is not. You know, you can see what they've done in Ottawa. That's an even playing field. Everybody starts out even. There's no benefit to anybody. It's like, you know, if I started out and I had $3.4 million in the bank, you had zero, I mean, would that be even? Would that be even? With a note to saying that, you know, I promise I won't use that money for elections. You know, I'll write that on the back of a pack of Eddie matches and pass it over. I mean, you know, that's the way it is. And as far as this bill, I agree. I absolutely agree. Union donations, corporate donations should be taken out of politics. The perception that you give somebody money to receive something to benefit your corporation, to benefit your company, to get a favor, that'll be gone. Absolutely. That aspect of it is gone from politics. And that doesn't make, it makes it easier for, you know, people to be cynical, you know, against elected officials. When they knock on the door and say, I elected you to do one thing, when you got there, you did nothing. You did nothing. I put you in that place, in that legislature, in the historic House of Assembly, to do something, and you did nothing. Is that what I want to hear when I go home? I want to hear that I came here to stand in my place to benefit the people of Nova Scotia, the people of Cape Breton, and the people of Cape Breton Nova.
That's why you're here.
That's why I'm here. That's why I'm standing in my place today. I'm not here to benefit anybody else. Bill 117, the bill that will be known as winning at all costs. That's what it will be known as. Not about doing what you can do for the constituents, but the bill that will be known as winning at all costs. You know, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you know, you know,
The deal with the devil.
I'll wrap her up in the sense that, I mean, it's elected to this House of Assembly in 2003 to do the best job that I can with the best of my ability, to provide the health and safety for the residents that I represent, to stand in my place and speak about representing the best of people in Cape Breton Island, the best of people. But here I am talking about Bill 117, a bill that benefits 2 out of the 3 parties, benefits nobody else. This is the win at all cost bill. That's what it's all about. It's all about winning elections at all costs, and the taxpayers are going to lose because this bill is going to be paid for by the taxpayers of Nova Scotia who had no input or say in this bill. It was rushed through, hoping that over Christmas nobody's going to hear about it, nobody's going to see it. But I mean, by us being here, I mean, this bill learned from what Ottawa did, banning union donations, banning corporate donations, and have 0 contributions. That's the right way to deal with election reform in Canada, and that's the way election reform should be dealt with in the province of Nova Scotia. You know, you're not breaking the book, and that's what your constituents want. The constituents that I represent want is the right to have fair and honest government. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to have my opportunity to speak on title during this discussion of Committee of the Whole House on Bill 117, an act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1991, the Members and Public Employees Disclosure Act. Now, Mr. Chair, this bill has the potential to change the democratic process in Nova Scotia for the better. It could eliminate the perception of undue influence on political decisions through large individual and corporate and union contributions. It could create more representative governance, in particular helping more women and representatives from minority groups to get elected to this chamber. And Bill 117 could restore credibility to those of us who have been elected. However, Bill 117 doesn't go far enough on many, many fronts. And because it's being rushed through its legislative process for reasons that we and in the official opposition can only guess at, but probably the government and the third party know for sure, this bill is not going to achieve its potential. Now, when this bill went to law amendments after the fall session, our party understood that it would continue its legislative progress during the spring session. And we expected that there would be public awareness, that there'd be public consultation, that all of this would happen before we move the bill forward. So why are we rushing this bill through? And why aren't the electoral reform measures that could potentially be in this legislation not coming through our traditional and long-time procedure of getting recommendations from our all-party election commission? Why is the public not being given the opportunity to understand what's involved, what the impacts of this legislation will be, and be able to take part in an informed discussion on this matter? So again, I ask, why are we rushing Bill 117 through? Because what does it say about our priorities? And I have to agree with my colleague from Cape Breton Nova that I could name 50 or more different issues that need to be discussed on the floor of this chamber. And yet we have this rare winter session to discuss one piece of legislation, Bill 117. Now, we could be talking about creating a provincial strategy to reduce the suffering caused by inadequate income and inadequate affordable housing in this province. We could be standing here talking about cancelling the moratorium on residential placements for people with disabilities. We could be standing here talking about taking measures to prevent family and community violence, very topical these days. We could be in this chamber talking about enhancing public transportation across this province, and I could go on and on and on. And actually, today, the Premier himself, during question period, suggested that perhaps we should be focused on creating jobs for Nova Scotians instead of discussing ministerial code of conduct. So there are lots of suggestions about higher priorities for our time and attention. But actually, we don't need to be standing here for the government to be acting on any of the issues that I just mentioned, because they're all within the area of responsibility and authority of Cabinet to take action in those areas. So why are we here? We're here to pass one piece of legislation, a flawed bill that in itself will not save lives, it won't enhance the quality of life for a single Nova Scotian, it's not going to improve programming, it's not going to add to the economic viability of Nova Scotia. Now, this bill could have been part of a significant electoral reform package. And that's what's happening in other provinces. That's the model, the best practices that have been adopted by other provinces across Canada, and I'm going to refer to them a little later. In its current state, Bill 117 is piecemeal, it's rushed, it appears to be self-serving, and it will only increase the disillusionment of most Nova Scotians for politicians and the political process. Now, this bill could have set contribution limits that settle once and for all any perception, any reality of influence peddling. This bill could have embraced the principle of equal opportunity for all Nova Scotians who perhaps want to get involved in the political process. And this bill, Bill 117, could make over our democratic system. It could make it so transparent and so clear that voters and party members alike would have a very good understanding of where any contributions came to a political party or to a candidate in a leadership campaign. That would be done in a timely, open manner. But no, this bill does not include any of those things. That's why I call it piecemeal, fragmented, flawed. Now, we already see many symptoms of voter frustration. Low voter turnout, fewer people voting every election. It's interesting, over the last 4 provincial elections, the number of voters has decreased each time in this province. We had an all-time low of 59.89% last June. And in comparison, in 1998, 75.76% of possible eligible voters actually voted. If you look up on the Elections Nova Scotia website, they've tracked the voter percentage for the last 5 elections provincially, and it's interesting. It's gone from 1993 from 75.39, slight increase in 1998 to 75.76, 1999 up to 68.12%, 2003 down to 65.79%, and further decrease in 2006 to 59.89%. Why are people not voting? They're disillusioned. They believe their vote doesn't count, that it doesn't make a difference. This is a sad state of affairs. And Bill 117 could actually have gone a long way to renew the credibility of the voting process and reconnected people to the value of voting and taking advantage of their citizenship rights in this province. But they view government and political institutions as unwilling or unable to address the issues that are important to them. They don't recognize the impact of public policy on their daily lives and activities. Another factor, I think, that creates public apathy about the electoral process has been the long-time pattern of governments to cut programs, to privatize programs, and to download onto families and volunteers and communities many of the responsibilities that perhaps traditionally provincial governments have held, or traditionally the public has expected government programs to provide. It's interesting. I am the critic for the voluntary sector, and that's certainly my background. And I have seen each year a continuing frustration of volunteers in terms of the amount of time that they have to spend fundraising versus the original purpose of their organization. And in fact, I remember one story, I believe it happened down in Yarmouth County, where a gentleman had joined the ground search and rescue organization down there and quit in frustration, or resigned in frustration a couple of years later, because he said he had joined ground search and rescue to actually use his skills and interest in the outdoors in finding people who were lost or wandered away from home if they were suffering perhaps from a mental condition or an illness or whatever. And he said he spent 99% of his time raising funds for the organization, and that wasn't his area of strength, that wasn't his area of interest. And he felt very strongly that government should have been providing the basic resources for equipment and training for these volunteers in order for them to do their job. This is a very basic need across Nova Scotia. A lot of voluntary sector organizations are actually performing the function, the frontline function of government in our many communities. And they are suffering from the lack of core funding and the lack of recognition for doing those jobs. And some of that frustration is carrying over into voter apathy. They feel that government, particularly provincial governments, aren't listening, they don't care, they don't value the work that volunteers do across Nova Scotia. And there's also the lack of trust in politicians. Now, it's interesting, many of you may be familiar with the Canadian Press Leger Marketing survey that's done on an annual basis. And they actually survey Canadians to find out their level of trust in certain professions. And I was interested in analyzing the 2004 results because voter apathy is related to Bill 117. And I think this is another indication of just how far down politicians are in terms of being trusted to do the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. It's interesting, in the 2004 survey, marketing survey, all categories of professionals actually dropped regarding trust. So people are reluctant to trust professionals. But the most shocking is the area of politicians. In that category, politicians ranked in every survey in the last number of years at the bottom of the survey. We're not only last, but the level of trust in politicians is going down each year. Now, would you be interested in finding out which professions were higher than politicians? You might find this interesting. People trust journalists more than politicians, lawyers more than politicians, insurance brokers more than politicians, real estate agents more than politicians, unionists, union members, publicists, and car salespeople. All those categories ranked higher than politicians on this well-recognized Canadian study. Now, why are public attitudes relevant? Why are public attitudes relevant to today's debate on Bill 117? Because I state again that Canadians, including Nova Scotians, are disillusioned, are frustrated with politicians and the political process. And where Bill 117 could go a long way to restore part of that trust level, it fails. We're dealing with a piece of legislation that feeds the perception that politicians don't care about ordinary Nova Scotians, because we're rushing through this legislation in a way that does not allow them to become fully informed, doesn't allow the general public to fully understand the impact of Bill 117, and even worse, this rush to pass Bill 117 in an atmosphere of potential exhaustion, considering the hours that have been set for the chamber this week. It allows people to continue to harbor suspicions that we're self-serving and are afraid of meaningful, informed public debate and input. Now, I'd like to go back to the survey, because it's interesting to find out which professionals people trust. And among the highest categories are firefighters, nurses, farmers, just listen outside, farmers, and doctors. Now, I'd like to draw a conclusion here. All those professions provide service when needed. You don't hear a firefighter say to someone whose house is burning down, you don't hear them saying, "Sorry, our program's full. Sorry, we don't have enough money." sorry, we're going to study your problem, or sorry, we'll think about helping you in next year's budget. And these are all common responses to cries for help that are being voiced by the opposition parties in this chamber on many, many issues beyond Bill 117. And it's interesting, and I think there's a clear message here for any party in government that the professions most admired and most trusted by citizens across our nation are the professions that prepare, that plan, that work together, and that deliver. They don't procrastinate, they don't delay, they don't make excuses. So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to suggest that is what citizens expect from their politicians. Now, you might wonder why I'm even talking about the lack of faith and trust in politicians. Well, it's very relevant to both the content within Bill 117, and it's also relevant to the process being used to pass Bill 117. And it's a big concern for me because I think I'm one of many people in this chamber who are trying to change the perception of the typical politician. Like you, I work long hours on behalf of my constituents and all the citizens of Nova Scotia. My background is as a volunteer and a paid worker within my community in the province, as I said, in the voluntary sector. And I entered politics to continue to serve my community. My whole life has been spent working with others to make my neighborhood, my community, my province, my country, and hopefully have some impact on the world, to make them all a better place for my family, for my neighbors, for my friends, and for all those who live in our various communities. My approach is to try and respect others' points of view. So it is important for me in this process of debating Bill 117, Mr. Chair, to want to hear from Nova Scotians on this critical political reform. I especially want to hear from marginalized groups who don't often get a chance or their fair chance to be heard or to be part of the decision-making process, in particular women and minorities. Now, I've talked about this in the chamber many times. Legislation is not neutral. It impacts differently on different groups of citizens. And I've been asking for a gender lens on legislation that comes before this House many, many times since I was first elected. I know, and research on other parts of public policy internationally have proven that any piece of legislation will impact differently on women than they will on men. And I feel that Bill 117, if given thorough consideration and if made part of a comprehensive strategy on electoral reform, would actually create better access for women to the political process. But does this bill take advantage of that? No. Now, Mr. Chair, you might argue that the women in this legislature can speak on behalf of Nova Scotian women. Well, we can try. But like men, women have different experiences and different perspectives, and they're not all represented. That is, the experiences and perspectives. They're not all represented in this chamber. In fact, I challenge all women MLAs in this current legislature to speak on this issue because of its impact in terms of the vacuum it's going to create on this issue. I am the 5th of 5 NDP women elected to this chamber to speak on this issue, and I would welcome the voice and the perspective from women MLAs in the other two parties. Why is Bill 117 so important to women? As you would recognize, women make up 52% of the population. You might wonder what percentage women make up of the full representation in our current chamber. I don't hear any guesses, but it's 17%. 17% compared to 52% in the general population. Now, getting elected to the Nova Scotia House of Assembly is still a major challenge for women and other marginalized groups. You might be interested to know that women have been allowed to vote and to run in provincial elections since 1918. That is 89 years ago. Our Nova Scotia track record is depressing. We had to wait until 1960 for the first woman to be elected in Nova Scotia to serve in this chamber, Gladys Porter, who was the mayor of Kentville before she ran for the provincial election in 1960 and won. Now, I'd like to challenge all members of the legislature. We've had 24 general elections since 1918. How many women have been elected in 24 general elections since 1918? I'll just give you a second to think about the answer. Neither suggestion is correct. We actually have had 26 women elected in 89 years. 26 women in 89 years. You might be interested in the breakdown by party. New Democratic Party, 10. Progressive Conservative Party, 10. Liberals, 6. Okay? 26 women in 89 years. And where do we rank or rate across Canada? We're in the middle of the pack regarding the percentage of women representatives in provincial and territorial legislatures. So the essential question as it relates to Bill 117, Mr. Chair, I want you to know I'm keeping on topic here, is that it raises the question, will Bill 117 create a fairer playing field for women candidates and increase their representation in this chamber? Who knows? Because minimizing barriers to women's participation is not even considered in this bill. If it were, then I would suggest that eliminating corporate and union donations or contributions and limiting individual donations to $1,000 would be in the bill, because this would create more opportunities for women to run for nomination and to run in provincial elections. And why do I say that? Because access to necessary financial resources has been identified in many, many studies as the major challenge to women's inclusion. Sorry, I should say a major challenge, because there are other major barriers. A major challenge to women's inclusion as political decision makers, not only in this province, but elsewhere in Canada. Now, last fall, a number of very credible Nova Scotian organizations, many of which whose names will be familiar to you, I'll mention them in a minute. They released a report entitled Untapped Resources, Women in Municipal Government in Nova Scotia. And I want you to focus on untapped resources. This consultation and process and the report on tapped resources were sponsored by the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities, the Halifax YWCA, and two groups of particular interest to the current, to any government, the Nova Scotia Advisory Council on the Status of Women, and Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations. Now, this study updated and confirmed findings from other studies. But they didn't set out to do that, but the actual recommendations were very similar to analysis and research that's been done by other groups, not only in Nova Scotia, but across Canada. And again, they identify that a major challenge to women's participation are the financial barriers. Because the reality in Nova Scotia is that women earn lower incomes. We earn, on average, 71 cents for every dollar earned by a man in Nova Scotia, even when women have higher qualifications and training. The reality is that women usually have less discretionary income to run for electoral office. Often, our income is critical to providing for the basic necessities of daily life for Nova Scotian families. It can't be reallocated for other things like running for nomination or covering the personal costs, of which I'm sure we're all very familiar, that one incurs during a provincial election that are not covered by the campaign, fundraising. Another barrier, a reality to women in Nova Scotia, is that we have more time challenges. These time challenges are around our paid work, our household management responsibilities, our caregiving responsibilities, not only for children and elders, but for people suffering from illness or recovering from surgery, and also our time challenges around our involvement as volunteers in our communities. And the last reality of being a woman in Nova Scotia that I want to talk about is that women don't have the same access to household assets to get election lines of credit and to cover, as I mentioned earlier, the personal costs in running in elections. So if we had had more time to consult on this bill, we might have included, for example, ceilings on spending for various political activities such as nominations, which have been shown elsewhere to have a positive impact on women's participation in the electoral process. So all these examples continue to come back to Bill 117 and point out and to illustrate why the bill is weak, why it should not be passed in this state, because it needs to be part of a much broader, more comprehensive, coordinated look at electoral reform in this province. Now, why is it important that this bill proactively increase women's participation as elected officials in Nova Scotia? Now, it's interesting. I had earlier talked about the Untapped Resources report. And in that report, they reinforce some basic democratic principles that all parties should be espousing, but especially the discussion and debate on Bill 117. That any electoral reform should increase the ability of government to reflect the population that they serve. Electoral reform should increase the range of people who have input into decision-making and ensure that it's the best use of our collective talents and experiences. Electoral reform should ensure that women's participation and women's input are counted. And electoral reform should allow this chamber to deal with issues that are important to women, because that will increase their relevancy to all Nova Scotians, and particularly Nova Scotian families. And it's interesting, I'd like to just briefly quote from the report. Beginning the quote, "When women are not consulted, when they are not at the table, governments make decisions without a complete picture of how their decisions affect citizens' lives," end of quote. So this again points to the need to have a gender lens on any legislation that comes before this chamber. And it also reinforces how critical it is that a broader and more considered approach to electoral reform be considered than this piecemeal Bill 117. Now, it's interesting. I'm probably now one of the older members in this chamber. So I have a lot of life experience to draw on. Yes, I do. Yes.
Certainly wouldn't know it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. One of my colleagues is suggesting no one's challenging me on that, that distinction. And I have to say that my life experience reinforces many of the observations that were found in the On-Tap Resources report, and that many of us, I know all parties, have looked at one time or another on increasing the participation of women as candidates for their party. So this is a very timely issue, and it's another reason why I am surprised that the issue is not dealt with in Bill 117. Women's perspectives and our contribution to the community continue to be undervalued by everyone, even, I might say, women. Now, I want to tell you a little story. I've mentioned a few times in this chamber how pleased and proud, honored, I guess would be a better word, I have been to be the first woman elected to a school board in this province. Thank you. So I just want to tell you a little bit about that story, because it is actually quite relevant to Bill 117, Mr. Chair. I've spent almost 15 years of my life fighting for fully elected school boards in this province. And I had the opportunity, after being an observer at school board meetings in my own community of Dartmouth for 5 years, of running in the first election for a partially elected school board in this province. It was back in 1978, and I was very young, I have to tell you. Dartmouth and Sydney were given the opportunity to be sort of the test cases for the school board election. The rest of the province would have their elections the next year, and then the city of Halifax would have their election the third year. And as it happened, Dartmouth's election was held first. And it was interesting. As I said, I'd been observing school board members on behalf of a community group in my community for 5 years. It took a lot of persuasion. They felt, because part of their activity was fighting for school board elections, so they felt that they wanted to support a woman in particular. Another issue we had at the time was that because up until then, school boards basically were 50% appointed by council, 50% appointed by the provincial government. And most of those appointees, without fail, were men. And so this group thought that this would be an opportunity to promote women running for 1/3 of the seats in Dartmouth and get more women on the school board. So it was suggested by provincial legislation that there be 12 seats available. So 4 would go to, again, provincial appointees, 4 would be municipal appointees, and 4 would be seats for elected members. So the call for nominations went out, and I don't remember the exact number. It was something like 17 or 19 people decided to offer in the school board election for the 4 seats. And I will never forget, sometimes advancing age allows you to forget some things, but this has been imprinted on my memory. The local newspaper did an article on people who had offered for nomination after nominations closed. And there were very significant write-ups about various business people, businessmen, I should say, and whatnot. And the very last sentence, and it was a fairly good article, it was probably 2 or 3 columns, the very last sentence, after naming all these various people who were going to offer for election, the last sentence read, "and a few housewives." And a few housewives. Didn't even have the courtesy of putting the names of those housewives in. Well, can you guess what category I fell in? I was one of the few housewives. And to further complicate or to increase the challenge for women running, this election was held across the entire city of Dartmouth. Okay, so no media coverage, campaign citywide, first-time election, people, for school board. So there were lots of barriers to involving women. And I'm pleased to say that there was tremendous support. And you won't be surprised to perhaps find out who came first in the results. It was Dr. John Savage. And who came second? One of the housewives, me. And that's why I claim to be the first woman elected to a school board in Nova Scotia. Now, I say that not to bring credit to myself, but to talk about how the process, the electoral process, has a real impact on who can run for election at various levels of government, and what the barriers and incentives or advantages might be. Bill 117 could go a long way to eliminate a number of barriers to women and representatives from minority groups to running for political office at the provincial level. And Bill 117 does not take advantage of that, nor does it even talk to those groups to find out what could be done at a minimal level in order to increase their participation. So that's why sometimes we don't recognize the impact of policy and the impact of legislation on different groups of citizens. So that is the reason I gave you my personal story on that, because I had that experience. I feel I'm much more sensitive to the potential of Bill 117 being able to move forward and correct some of those. Pardon? Yes, Dartmouth, 1978, yes. Now, I have another perspective that I think may be unique in this chamber. And it's the fact that I'm probably the only MLA in this legislature who is the current past president of a political party. And you're probably aware that I was the party president when I ran for office in 2003. And so when I was elected, I resigned my presidency, and the current president, the person who replaced me is still currently the president, so that's why I'm still the past president of the New Democratic Party of Nova Scotia. I mention that to illustrate that I understand fairly well the financial impact of Bill 117 on political parties. I've had a lot of experience in trying to stabilize a political party in terms of fundraising. I understand how the advantages of that stable financing through the public taxpayer. I understand the impact of that. Fundraising is challenging and time-consuming. But I'm very concerned about Bill 117, even wearing my party hat, because I think it's important that we take the time to analyze the impact of this so that we know what we're getting into, what the real and long-term benefits and challenges will be. Because it's important to know up front what the impacts of Bill 117 will be. I think we've all had experience in looking at how slow and time-consuming it is to change a piece of legislation, to fill in the gaps, to fill in the vacuums, and to counter the unintended consequences of legislation that has not been thoroughly considered, that isn't a comprehensive approach to the issue that it tries to address, and that is rushed through the approval procedure so that we don't end up with the best possible election reform legislation. And I fear that this sort of piecemeal approach to electoral reform in Nova Scotia is going to make us shake our heads afterwards. Why did we do this so quickly, and why didn't we include this? There are aspects to electoral reform that have been studied and passed by other provinces in Canada that we can use as models, that we can see what the impact has been, so we can reflect on that and try to modify it so we've got the best possible package of electoral reform for our citizens in Nova Scotia. Does Bill 117 do this? Does the process that we're using to approve it, does it meet those standards? I would suggest no. Because this bill is not based on the federal model, nor does it seem to be based on the provincial experiences across this province. So my question is, why not? Why not? We often compare or use as the model for legislation in Nova Scotia what's working well, what's happened, what's been adopted in other provinces. Why are we rushing into this without clearly examining the best possible options that are available within our own country? We're not even talking about going outside Canada, within our own country. There is the assumption that that public funding of political parties and campaigns will reduce the potential for conflict of interest and lower the risk of misuse and corruption. And because that's the assumption, I think it's incumbent on us to build public confidence that we're working from that base, and that the content of Bill 117, Mr. Chair, and the legislative process that we're using to adopt it reflect that. Now, it's interesting. In my research, I came across a quote by former Prime Minister Joe Clark. And he once pondered that it is, quote, not healthy for the party system to be so subject to the powerful and the rich. The appearance of improper influence is a significant source of cynicism about public life, end of quote. And it strikes me that Bill 117 will continue to allow fairly large corporate and union contributions up to $5,000. We have an opportunity here to completely eliminate corporate and union contributions. And that would reinforce in the eyes and confidence of the public that we have their best interests at heart, and that we're not self-serving in terms of looking at this only from possibly, might I suggest, the perspective of what's best for my political party. Now, Mr. Chair, it's interesting because the opportunity to speak during Committee of the Whole House on Bill 117 led me to do some internet research about electoral reform. One hears about it all the time, but perhaps isn't quite as familiar with the details of what's been going on in other provinces. I wasn't quite so interested in looking at what they actually did, but I was interested to see the procedure, the process that other provinces use to discuss electoral reform. And so I started fairly close at home. I looked at what had happened in Prince Edward Island. Now, the model they used to create legislation, they started off with an independent commission. This commission had a broad mandate to look at electoral reform and its impact in Prince Edward Island. The commission actually consisted of a retired Supreme Court justice, and he came up after various research and study components. He came up with a discussion paper. Now, this was released to organizations, to the general public, to the political parties, and it had in it options for electoral reform. The next step was a series of public hearings where people could come and learn more about the discussion paper. They could have input into it. They could talk about the future direction of recommendations. Then the commission actually made recommendations after hearing from the general public, made recommendations for changes. What they had planned to do, and I'll tell you what the current situation is, what they had planned to do was to give the public a chance to vote. And so there was going to be another round of public consultations, and then there was going to be a public vote on this electoral reform package. Now, currently, it hasn't quite got to that point, but currently there is an all-party committee examining the second stage report, and I believe making recommendations for the next steps. So these are our cousins in PEI, and it sounds to me like that's a very sensible approach. Very inclusive, taking the time to study what's happening elsewhere, fully understanding the impact in their province, modifying it to meet the specific needs and priorities of citizens in Prince Edward Island, and involving as many people as possible in this very deliberate, methodical process of electoral reform. Very noteworthy and interesting why we're not following that particular path. So then I went a little farther afield and I looked at what they're doing in Quebec. Now, I don't actually have an update on where their process stands, although I believe that they have actually implemented an electoral reform legislation package. But I was curious to know how they got to that point. In Quebec in 2002, the government created a ministerial position within their cabinet. And this minister was responsible for reform of democratic institutions. That was the mandate of this particular minister. And in 2003, the government, through this ministry, held a huge forum to talk about electoral reform. And over 1,000 people, 1,000 citizens of Quebec attended this forum to discuss these issues. So I would suggest that they did have good and adequate representation and input from the citizenry of that province. The bill was drafted and then went through its, I would presume, its normal legislative process. Again, a procedure very different from the one that we're adopting here by pushing through inadequate legislation in a very rushed way. Coming back to the Maritimes, in New Brunswick, again, I was interested not so much in the result, because I realize you have to tailor electoral reform to your particular province or territory, but in New Brunswick, they set up a commission on legislative democracy. And it was interesting because part of its mandate in New Brunswick, quote, was to make recommendations on strengthening and modernizing the province's electoral system and democratic institutions. And I would like you to pay attention to this part of their mandate in order to make them more fair, accountable, accessible, and open. I would suggest very noteworthy and laudable objectives for us as well. Now, I'm sure we've all heard bits and pieces about the electoral reform movement in British Columbia. And they took, I'm not going to get into the details, but they took a full year for a citizens' assembly that was appointed by the government to examine the electoral system and propose recommendations for reform. So no matter what their outcome, no matter where they are in that process, I think what's happening with electoral reform everywhere else in Canada, where it's happening, is a very different situation from how we're approaching it here in Nova Scotia. And if anything would suggest that we should wake up and hold back on passing Bill 117, I think it would be the examples and models of our politicians in different assemblies and legislatures and territories across this country. How can we be so out of sync, so out of step? Do we have objectives that are we looking at objectives, unknown as they may be, that were not the driving force in these other provinces? It makes one very, very suspicious. The other area of concern that I have about Bill 117, Mr. Chair, and I feel uncomfortable even talking about this. It's like the moose under the table. Everyone's aware of it. No one wants to talk about it, except for my colleagues from the NDP caucus. And that is the fact that Bill 117 will officially endorse the continuing use of the questionable Liberal Trust Fund for political purposes. Now, I have friends, close friends, in all three main political parties. not necessarily in this House, but across Nova Scotia. Many of my friends are of the Liberal persuasion. They are honest, sincere, hardworking, and principled people. But they feel very uncomfortable about discussing the origins and use of the Liberal Trust Fund. But it's not only an embarrassment for members and supporters of the Liberal Party, it's an open sore on the political credibility of all political parties in our province. And I think that's one reason that we have to bring it out from undercover in our debate on Bill 117. We have to prevent the continued use of that questionable money for political purposes in our province. Now, my colleague from Cape Breton Nova has suggested that there are many worthy causes in this province where that money could be spent to make a huge, significant difference in the lives of Nova Scotians. And I would suggest that, that the Liberal Party may want to look seriously at donating that money to some of those worthy causes. Again, coming back to Bill 117 and how we're rushing it through, it's unfortunate because if we are outvoted, which, you know, our odds are in this chamber, the candidates for the Liberal leadership race will not have an opportunity to put their thoughts on this matter on the record. And that's going to continue this open sore into another generation of political activity in our province. To sum up, Bill 117 is too little, it's too rushed, and it's too limited a vision. The issue of electoral reform is too important in Nova Scotia to be done in this haphazard way, and it's too significant, as I suggested earlier, to be adopted through exhaustion. It's ironic that the government's standard practice of review, delay, study, postpone, procrastinate is being suspended, and a bill which needs consideration and study is being fast-tracked to this extent. My party has serious concerns about its limitations. It's not in line with the federal legislation. It doesn't eliminate corporate and union contributions. It doesn't provide for timely, full disclosure for leadership candidates. It didn't include an opportunity for women's organizations, minority groups, and the general public to be informed and consulted in a meaningful way. It won't remove financial barriers facing women and others as candidates. There are risks, huge risks, in rushing flawed public policy through. It will just increase and reinforce the perception from the public that we're stifling their understanding and debate, and it doesn't meet national and international standards in both the content and the process. We need to regain the trust of Nova Scotians and politicians in our political process. Electoral reform can be done in ways that ensure fairness, openness, and clarity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The honourable member from Halifax-Shabukto.
This is the first opportunity I've had to speak publicly about Bill 117. This is the case because when we were dealing with this bill at second reading, an occasion on which all of my colleagues were looking to take full advantage of the House rules that allow them to speak for a full hour, when we assembled our speakers list, I was last on that list. That perhaps reflects where I sit, but I think in the kinds of terms that my colleague from Timberley Prospect would often use, I was assigned that so that I could bat cleanup. But I missed that opportunity, and I regret it. I regret that I haven't yet had the opportunity to speak publicly about this very important piece of legislation. I've been anxious to do so. But even given that I've been anxious to do so, I would have been happy to wait at least one more hour, perhaps even several more hours, if only some members of the Liberal caucus took it into their heads to stand and let us know what they think about this bill. Because surely one of the main thrusts of this bill is to give them a clear benefit for something that is widely regarded as an historic wrong that continues to this day in Nova Scotia. So I would have been happy to wait at least another hour, perhaps several hours, if some members of that third-party caucus were prepared to stand up and tell us what they think about it. Especially would I have been prepared to stand aside and wait happily if some of those in that caucus who seem to have leadership aspirations for their party were prepared to put on record their views. But of course, we're not finished with debate on Bill 117 yet. The opportunity is available to them. So this is now my chance to offer a few thoughts about this bill. I would have spoken at second reading if not for the fact that our party entered into some talks with the government about what would happen if we ceased using the full hour available for each member at second reading. And part of that agreement was that the bill itself would not come forward again until what was seen as really the spring session. But you know what? There was an immediate change in what it is that normally would be the procedure around this bill. The next thing that happened, virtually right away, is that the Law Amendments Committee was called into session so that members of the public, late in December, busy with other things, were given virtually no opportunity to come forward in a reasoned way, in a reasonable and reasoned way, to say what they think. And then, of course, the government sets up a select committee, apparently to go off and listen to the public. But of course, that committee has not been struck. And in the meantime, here we are at third reading, or Committee of the Whole House, moving into third reading with the government's clear intention to move ahead. What on earth is this? This is a day in which we're dealing with a bill that is a proposed amendment to what's known as the Members and Public Employees Disclosure Act, the underlying thought of which is that disclosure is important for accountability. Well, that's fine, but we also find ourselves on this day in the middle of a mess in which accountability and the failures around it are front and center in the news. This is an amazing thing. It is no wonder that there is a serious erosion of public trust, not just in politicians at large, but in trust in this government in particular. It's palpable out there. It is palpable. Now, I think that maneuvering was fundamentally unfair. I think it just shouldn't have happened. It should not have been part of the process. And I'm not saying that I'm not willing to be here for a winter session. I'd be happy to be here for a winter session right now, dealing with other more substantive matters, other things that we could probably turn our minds to much more productively than this. This is not pressing legislation. This is not something that has to be dealt with for the public good in Nova Scotia on an immediate basis, not by any means. How disgraceful it is for the government, not for the opposition parties, but for the government, how disgraceful it is that we continue year after year to be the legislature that sits the fewest days in this country. That's not for my unwillingness to work. I know it's not through unwillingness on the part of my colleagues here to work, to be here in the legislature, to deal with issues, to deal with substantive issues. Indeed, that's what we want. We want to see that. We're prepared to be involved in that. We're prepared to roll up our sleeves and get to work over all the issues that are pressing to Nova Scotians. We've heard some of them today. Well, in fact, we even heard the Premier mention it in question period. Jobs and employment, he said. What about the economy? Isn't that more important than issues of the accountability of one of my ministers? That's what we want to get on with. That's what we want to deal with. But isn't what the minister or the Premier and his party are putting in front of the House? They're putting in front of the House, apparently, because they think it's urgent, pressing, top of their list, that there has to be a change to the way political parties, their own, of course, benefiting most of all, are funded. That's not an appropriate sense of priorities. What about poverty? What about the environment? What about workplace safety? What about our rural communities, some members of which we hear outside this House on the streets at this very moment? Those are matters of much higher priority than this bill. So you know what? This is a fundamental flaw with this legislation, not with the content of this legislation, but with the mere fact that we're dealing with it apparently on an urgent and pressing basis according to the dictates of the government, which, even though it is a minority government, still gets control of the legislative agenda under our rules. Well, I have to say, I'm not impressed. I don't think the public is impressed, and I think the public gets the message. The public understands that this is not the right sense of priorities. Well, what is it? What is it that is fundamentally wrong with Bill 117? I've been listening to the comments made by members, primarily members of this caucus, and it seems that there are perhaps 8, maybe 9 or 10 different headings that have been raised as points of criticism of this bill. Where to start? One could start with virtually any of these points. I'm aware that that's the kind of phrase that people sometimes use when they feel in a muddle and they're not sure which are the priority items. Everything seems to be all jumbled up together. But you know, that's not the case here. When I talk about 7 or 8 items that have to do with what is wrong with Bill 117, I'm talking about 7 or 8 items that are fundamental flaws with this bill, and all of them are pretty well on an equal status when it comes to reasons not to like, not to endorse, not to vote for this bill. So I'm going to briefly list them, then I'm going to say a few words about each of them, and I'm going to say more than a few words about those couple of items that I have not yet heard other members elaborate, because indeed I think there are a couple of points that have not yet been mentioned. So here's the list, as it appears to me, this list of fundamental criticisms of Bill 117, reasons that should be taken into account by members here when they decide how to vote, and by the public when they assess our actions. The first, of course, is the fact that the bill essentially gives a legal blessing to the continued existence and use by the third party of those dubious trust funds. What a scandal. I don't know how the government had the face to bring in such a deal, but there it is, and that's the first thing that is fundamentally wrong with this bill. Second thing is that this bill is really, in some sense, retroactive. This bill looks back at how we all did as parties in the 2006 election, the late lamented hostilities, and says, let's reward ourselves based on how we just did. It seems to me that if there's going to be a fundamental change in how electoral finances are conducted and framed in Nova Scotia, legislation should be introduced for the next election. The rules should be set up in advance. I'll get back to that. But that's another flaw with this bill. Third problem is that, of course, the bill has continued reliance on donations from entities like corporations and unions. A lot of members over here have identified that. It doesn't nudge us towards the federal model in which there is reliance purely on donations from individuals. That's really where it is that a bill of this sort should go. If that's been identified, well articulated, it's out there, everyone knows it. Another point, of course, is that this bill makes no distinction between funding for political parties in election years and funding for